And here we go. And welcome everyone to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on this week's episode of Battle for the Big East, we'll be talking UConn basketball with Jared Kotler. Jared, how are you doing today?
Hey, good. I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be back in the Big East and talking UConn in the Big East with you.
Yeah, I know this is UConn's. It's very unique because the Big East kind of went through a facelift, and they reorganized, and UConn was sent out to the American Athletic Conference. But lo and behold, 2020, UConn's back. So first off, how do you think you and the UConn followers, fans feel about being back in the Big East?
Oh, everyone's thrilled. It's probably the one good thing of 2020 for everyone in UConn Nation is being back in the Big East. Not to rag on the American, but it just wasn't a great fit for UConn. When you think of UConn, you think of the classic Big East battles. You think of Villanova, you think of Georgetown, even some of the teams in the Big East that aren't there. They're at least those Northeast teams. You're thinking of Syracuse. UConn going out to play at Wichita, at Tulsa, at SMU, it just wasn't the same. And I think, as you'll see, especially with Dan Hurley now as the head coach, he's just perfect for the Big East. It fits the style of recruiting he wants. It's great to be back home.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned with Dan Hurley, he was a Seton Hall alum, and he definitely, coming from Jersey City, his father, Bob Hurley, is a Hall of Famer. His brother won 2 national titles at Duke as a point guard. And it was too, Dan Hurley was waiting for his spot. He had a good gig in URI, and he kind of waited, and he jumped on UConn. And lo and behold, I definitely think UConn coming back to the Big East, I think helps everyone out because, it's, when they mentioned the Big East, they had the documentary on ESPN where it says, oh, the Big East is dead. The Big East is dead. Villanova wins 2 national titles. Well, you only got Villanova. And once you get UConn back in, yeah, traditionally over the last 20 years, they were one of the powerhouses under Jim Calhoun. But, since we're talking about this year right now, it feels like the player to focus on for UConn right now is James Bouknight. Now, how do you think about him playing so far this year?
Yeah, James has been phenomenal. I think he kind of went into this season with this is going to be it for him. This is his year. He's going to do what he has to do, and he's going to move on to the NBA. And if you see any of the mock drafts, he's a guy you're seeing climb up mock drafts right now. So it's really exciting to see him play. And I know UConn fans are going to be disappointed. They probably won't get another chance to see him play in person. But at least we could all sit at home and just really marvel at what he's doing. I mean, you look at what he did against Creighton the other day, put up 40 points.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only other UConn player to put up more than 40 points in a game is Danielle Marshall, who did it a couple times. But you're talking about guys like Ray Allen, Kemba, to see what he was able to do there. It was truly impressive, and he really put the team on his back. And I think one thing, UConn's looking for out of him is for him to really mature and become that leader of the team. Right now, they don't necessarily have a leader per se that you think of when you think of the guys that have led UConn in the past. There's not a Kemba, there's not a Shabazz type guy who's, going to go out there and put the team on his back when they're struggling. And against Creighton was really like one of the first games you saw James step up and be like, I'm going to get the job done here. Just kind of went on just a heat check mode for a little bit during that game. Because we've seen in the past with him, he sometimes coasts a little bit. The talent's there and he's got it, but sometimes you'll see he shows up for like a good 25 minutes and kind of zones out for a little bit. But when you look at what's going to make this UConn team successful, it's definitely going to be James Bouknight and what he can do for them.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Bouknight's numbers from the Creighton game, he played 40 out of the 45 minutes. He shot 13 of 24 from the field, 5 of 12 from 3, 9 of 12 from the free throw line. He only had 2 assists, if that's the one knock on him. But when you really look around, though, UConn as a team only shot 35%. So Bouknight had to take that game over, and he had that 40 points. But, talking about that Creighton game, there were some good things you can talk about it and some bad things you can talk about it. I think the good things is, you had Creighton. This is a different Creighton team from what I saw.
Yeah.
Especially at the UConn game where usually Creighton would need to score to the 80, 90 points. They couldn't win ugly. But this was a game Creighton won ugly. And you see there's a lot more defensive intensity. for their team right now. So it's like, I guess what would be some of the good takeaways from the game against Creighton this past week?
Yeah, I think especially for UConn in that game, I don't think fans necessarily knew what to expect out of UConn against Creighton. They were coming out of their 14-day COVID pause to begin with. So were they going to be rusty? You get a top 10 team coming in, a team you've never matched up against before. When you look at how the schedule is supposed to be, they're supposed to get St. John's to open Big East play. You get an old rivalry back there, but you've got one of the newer Big East teams in your first game there. So again, not really knowing what to expect. I think obviously James Bouknight again, showing what he can do was a huge takeaway from that game. You see some of the other guys there. Tyrese Martin had a good game on the boards there. I think he had 10 rebounds against them. So they showed that they could really play one of these grinded out type games that Dan Hurley wants, where it's going to be defensive focused. UConn's going to just make it really uncomfortable for the opposing team. And I think you saw that. RJ Cole, who we could talk about a little bit more later, unfortunately didn't have the best offensive game for them. He missed a couple of clutch free throws down the line that would have sealed the game there. But I think that those things get highlighted. But what doesn't, to the same extent as the defense he played, he locked down Marcus Zagorowski. Zagorowski is your Big East preseason player of the year. And I think he held him to 11 points, I think it was.
Yes, he
did. He just never got in any sort of rhythm. So I think that's another takeaway for UConn is that their defense can compete at this level, could really make teams grind it out. We saw in a few of the games earlier this year, UConn had to deal with some foul trouble issues just based on the style of defense they play. They really want to get up on you, just make it uncomfortable. And it's hurt them a little bit in terms of the foul trouble they've gotten into. They stayed away from that for the most part against Creighton. But nice to see that defense really be able to take role. And I think one thing that the Creighton game showed, UConn has an advantage, I think, on the boards against a lot of these Big East teams. I think the depth in the UConn front court, which we saw in this game, is really going to be beneficial because I don't necessarily think you see as much of that big on big action in the Big East as it might have been known for, back in the glory days when UConn was there originally.
Yeah, I think though too, when you talk about the big front courts, one that pops into mind, I think Providence is going to be a battle with Nate Watson up front.
He's a handful.
Yeah, he's a handful. He had a monster game this past weekend. I think he put up 20 and 10. Also, Seton Hall has a nice dynamic because they got Mamu, who's a 6'10" point forward all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be an interesting matchup. But, going forward though too, we mentioned about James Bouknight and we talked a little bit about Cole. I think for UConn to be successful, Bouknight needs some help. They're going to need to be a consistent number 2 scorer. Who do you think that consistent number 2 scorer is going to be?
I think that was the biggest takeaway from the Creighton game is Bouknight can't do it by himself. He definitely needs that second scorer. I think they tried to get RJ Cole into that role. And I think that's why if you look at his stat line, it wasn't the prettiest against Creighton, but he did have good looks. He was open and he's got a history of being a scorer, albeit at a lower level. He transferred from Howard, but I pulled the stats before we talked. When you look at what he did at Howard, his freshman year averaged 23 points a game. His sophomore year, 21 points a game. So he's a guy who can light it up. He was 2 of 8 from 3 against Creighton. I think he could do better for sure. Is it going to be RJ? I think that'll be interesting to see. Maybe it's the guy down low like Isaiah Whaley, who really emerged towards the end of last year and has continued that trend into this year. When you're looking at some of the other guards, though, you got a guy like Jalen Gaffney who showed that he kind of steadied the ship and run a pretty good point as he kind of took over those duties towards the second half of last year. So there are definitely options there. It's just going to be finding who can be that consistent second scorer. And, at this point, it looks like it could be something that kind of changes game to game depending on who's got the hot hand there.
That's true. And also, too, we mentioned a little bit about it, too. And you mentioned before, UConn will have an advantage in the front court. Who do you think would probably be the most dominant presence? Because I thought Adam Sanogo coming in, the freshman who reclassified and committed to UConn, I thought he would be making a tremendous impact. Right now, it seems like he's still adjusting to college basketball. So which forwards do you see stepping up for UConn?
Yeah, I definitely think Isaiah Whaley is going to be the guy to look for there. he's continuing his trend from last year, averaging almost 10 points a game, just a little over 6 rebounds a game too. So he's going to be the key guy to look out to. He fouled out right at the end of regulation against Creighton. And that was one thing I think like kind of tipped things in Creighton's favor. Once he went out, kind of threw them off a little bit. Josh Carlton, who's a senior on this team, he's had his ups and downs. He had a really good sophomore year. Last year, he put on a bunch of weight. They tried to make him a bit more muscular, a bit more stronger, and it kind of weighed him down a bit. So he's slimmed down a lot this year. He was kind of in the doghouse to start the year. It didn't seem like he was given and playing up to the standards Coach Hurley wanted in practice. So he kind of came off the bench in that first game. It was a no-show in one game, but against USC, which is a really good front court, stepped up and had a really impressive game there with 9 points and 11 boards. So those are two names. I'll give you one more here, and we can talk about Sanogo too. But a Cook, who tore his Achilles towards this end of last season. He was one of the leading shot blockers in the nation last year. He is due back soon. Dan had said that due to the COVID pause and them not being able to practice kind of limited how much he was able to do. They were hoping to get him back around Christmas time. Now it's looking a little bit more into January, but he's going to be another piece down the road to really keep an eye out on.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we kind of reviewed the Creighton game. You mentioned the USC game, which was a key win because USC has had some convincing wins and they do got a strong front court there. But going forward in the Big East, how do you see UConn matching up with other Big East teams? Like, I guess we got to start off. How do you think they'll do against Villanova, which, they're going to be the number one dog for a long time until someone takes it from them?
Yeah, no, I think those games are going to be really interesting for sure. If you look last year, the two teams played, and I think it was like a 6-point loss, UConn at Villanova last year. Don't quote me exactly around that, but it was around that range. UConn showed they could hang with Villanova. I think, again, UConn has some things that could kind of help them in that matchup. I know Robinson Earl's a great guy down low for them. UConn can match them there. But, if they can help throw off Villanova from beyond the arc, which is kind of what they did against Creighton the other night, and kind of, temper them down a bit, that could be big. I do think UConn will match up well with a lot of these teams. It's going to be interesting. Again, it definitely is a jump from the American. And who knows, especially this year with all the craziness, do you get someone out of a pause? Is UConn in another pause coming out of that? Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting. But I do think this is a team that definitely can compete towards that top half of the Big East for sure.
And I'm gonna mention two programs who, they were in the Big East when UConn left, but it felt like once UConn left, they started to rise up and they were consistently making the NCAA tournament. They were probably plucking some players that might have gone to UConn traditionally in years before. And the two teams are Seton Hall and Providence.
Yeah.
So how do you see UConn matching up with both those teams? We'll talk about Seton Hall first and then Providence.
Yeah, no, I think both those games are going to be, and going up against both those teams are going to be a lot of fun. And I think you're going to get some great matchups there. I think they're all pretty even for the most part. I think, you'll see, I know Kevin Willard wasn't thrilled with UConn coming back in the Big East because we already saw, as you mentioned, that Adama Sanogo was picked right out of Seton Hall's basket. They thought they had him ready to go and commit there, and then Coach Hurley swooped in and got him there. So they're going to just be some fun. And I think UConn Providence in particular, just given the proximity of the two schools, I know probably the first go around, UConn fans didn't necessarily view Providence as much of a rival as Providence viewed UConn. But I think going forward, it's just going to be a lot of fun. These are going to be two teams that play similar style. I know Coach Hurley and Ed Cooley have some background from when Dan was at Rhode Island. So it's just going to be fun to watch. I think you're going to see pretty evenly matched teams for the most part just really go at it, because I think those are two other teams that are going to be competing with UConn at that top half of the Big East this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like when you look at the Big East, you can say there's UConn or you can say there's Villanova, then there's Creighton, and then from three down, it's kind of it's going to be a nice little healthy bloodbath.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saw Xavier, who, was picked, I think 7th it was preseason, and now they're undefeated and looking pretty good. So
yeah, and also the Marquette looks like a totally different team too.
Yeah, they do.
The way that it's like how are they going to replace Marcus Howard? It looks like they look better off right now. There's a lot more balance. If Theo John is hitting, jump hooks from all over the place. But let me ask you this question: for UConn's back in the Big East, what would you consider to be a successful season for UConn in 2020, 2021?
Yeah, I think for UConn, definitely if they could come in, I think they were predicted 4th, I think it was, preseason in the Big East. So I think if they finished around there, I think that would certainly be considered a success for them. Obviously, this is a team that expects to make the NCAA tournament, possibly, make it on to the second weekend there. Again, it's going to depend on a few factors. If they could, get that consistent second score, how their game will translate over to these Big East games. It's definitely going to be different for sure for them, a much tougher level of competition. So, for this year's team, definitely, looking at that NCAA tournament as kind of the baseline for whether or not they had a successful season.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially too, they are facing that jump. The American Athletic Conference has some top teams, but I think night in, night out, I think the Big East has more depth, as you have DePaul.
Absolutely, yeah.
As DePaul, I think they're playing today, but who knows? They've been canceled several times. But before you guys go, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button so you can follow us on Sports Talk Line, where you can find us, all these new episodes coming in. Jared, feel free to plug anything that you want to talk about or mention.
Yeah, definitely. I know I didn't necessarily give any background on myself at the beginning, but I host the Connecticut Scoreboard podcast, focused on all things Connecticut sports, with a big focus on UConn. Had a lot of great UConn guests on in the past, so feel free to catch up on that content. Have Coach Calhoun, Karan Butler, Josh Boone, a lot of fun former UConn players having conversations with. You can follow us on any podcast player you want. Got a YouTube channel, the Connecticut Scoreboard Podcast, on Twitter at CT Scoreboard Pod, and if you want to follow me at my name, as you'll see it here, Jared Kotler. So appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk some UConn hoops.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Jared. And everyone out there, listen like you play with intensity.